This will not be visible until two attendees until the schedule starts. And now we're live. Okay. I still see my camera settings. So now we're live.
Okay.
I don't know what life is like in the outside world here.
Well, we will see people when they sign in, right? When they join the session?
I believe so, yes. Yes. But I have my, oh, there we go. Okay, good.
Yeah, I see people in the session, but I don't know, I don't think they can hear us yet. So if you
attendees, I clicked the 3 people.
I clicked people and I see Mara, Chuck, Karen Vaughn, Lori, you, Cam. You don't see that, huh? Under the people?
I don't see that. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. But see, I see. And so we're talking, sorry, people. We're talking to each other.
I don't know if we're live,
started.
though. I don't know if we're live.
Yeah, it had a little pop-up that said we're not live until attendees start showing up, but we have attendees in the group chat here. So,
well, maybe we can chat with Karen and see, or with Mara and see if she can hear us. Maybe we'll.
Well, that's Karen Vaughn, and Karen Frazier is who we're working with.
Yeah.
For this. Any chats? If there are people in our room already, if someone would send a chat, that would be excellent. And then we can see where we are with our attendees. People have been very good about starting chats when they come into the room.
Here, I'll send them a chat.
I wonder if the people that we have here are registered. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe.
We close at 11:15.
Yeah. And are you going to stay through the session, or you're leaving once we get started?
I'm gonna stay through the session, but I will close my camera.
Okay.
Is that what you wanted, or did you want?
I'm afraid to leave because if you leave your camera open, I just think you're, based on what I saw in some of the other sessions, you're just up in the top corner a little bit.
I think you will be in the corner for sure because you're presenting. We'll see where I am with that.
Okay.
When I my camera. We'll start right at 10:30. I'll go ahead and start the intro at that.
We've got about 5 minutes left to go. Is that right? Or what? Yes. Let's see what time it is. Use my phone. That might make better sense. Yeah, I've got 6 minutes to go. Yeah, on Friday, I was really worried that the platform was not going to work. I thought, oh no, poor Karen was ready to have a nervous. There we go. Let's see. Please let us know when
That's
you're
me.
here. Okay, so I can see your chat.
Yes. We'll see how other people come in. I think the other one is still going.
I wonder do you suppose you have to start the broadcast to get any?
I did.
Oh, you
We're
did.
being
So you
recorded.
started. That's right, because we were wondering if they could hear us. Okay.
Yes. So we're being recorded now.
I see a lot of people, more people now signed up.
I do. Yeah. When I hit on the blue strip on the left-hand side, I hit those 3 people. And I don't see anybody in that part of it. So I'm wondering if the people in our chat area are registered. And then we have one listener and it says it's a mixer.
I don't know. I just saw that, the people listed on the right hand, when you click on people over there, the list keeps growing.
Okay. We have one person officially in.
Okay. All righty. And we still got a few minutes to go, so.
Did my camera ever get into focus?
It's really strange. It goes in and out. Right now, you're in the blurry stage.
Oh, no. Maybe I need to be closer.
No, that makes it worse.
Okay, I'll go far away.
Yeah.
Angled. It could be the lighting. I'm wondering if the lighting is an issue.
I don't know. I mean, as I said, it's almost there now. And see, you look fine now. It's almost like it's trying to focus or something.
I angled the laptop a little differently, so I'm on a laptop versus the camera. I think the camera's
okay. So not with your camera on your desktop then. What Karen did say yesterday that there's a delay when you start the broadcast, I thought she said, for everyone to be able to hear. Is that right?
I think, well, when we did the test, there's the studio page and then there's the stage page. And when we played them together, we heard there was a lag.
Okay.
So it will be a small delay. So she told us to wait a minute or so before we actually stop the broadcast. If anybody's out there, if you could just give us a note to let us know you're in, we would greatly appreciate it.
I'll just send something.
Unable to tell if everybody's in.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right.
And it's 10:30.
There's Andy. There we are.
This party started.
Great.
Everybody's coming in, so here we go. Good morning, housing colleagues. My name is Andrea Palmer, and I am an associate planner with the City of Ventura, and I'm also the vice chair of the home organization. I am completely overjoyed to present this particular speaker, our keynote for the 19th annual Ventura Ventura County Housing Home Conference. She currently works as a consultant for the UC Berkeley Turner Center for Housing Innovation, and she also serves as a senior executive consultant for Inclusion Inc., a diversity and inclusion consulting firm. Her history includes serving as a past HUD Region 9 regional administrator, VP for Community Relations at PG&E, and the Executive Director of Alameda County and the Dublin Housing Authorities. She actively serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of the San Francisco Foundation and is the Vice President of the Mills College in Alameda County, California Employee Retirement Association, and she serves on an advisory board for the Public Policy Institute of the California and UC Berkeley School of Public Policy. I am pleased to introduce to you Ophelia Basgal with her presentation of New Housing Mindset and Innovations Throughout California. Ophelia, take it away.
And it's a pleasure to be this morning. And we have about 35 minutes or so that we're going to take for the presentation and leave some time at the end for questions and answers. We'd ask that you use the Q&A. There's a button for Q&A. That's where you should post your questions as opposed to the chat. And you can do those throughout the presentation. So that will be, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We had a little bit of a challenge with some of the other presentations this morning, but hopefully it will come up. All right. And I'm going to go to the presentation here. Okay, so this is going to be talking about a new housing mindset and really innovation. I'm attempting to present a case study that I think demonstrates the principles of innovation. And my intent is then to, after I finish going through the housing part of the presentation, I want to spend the second half talking about innovation, what it is, and how you can actually work on bringing that into your organization and sustaining it. So here we go. So this morning you've heard about the factors that, the challenge that we're facing with affordable housing in California. And I want to talk about some of those factors. So first of all, there's a regulatory environment. We hear a lot of talk about the impact of regulations, but there are actual studies, some done by HUD that they published in Evidence Matters, that shows the clear correlation between high housing costs and local and state regulations that aren't attributable to health and safety issues. And those range anywhere from, an increase in costs of 5% for single family to 2.5% for multifamily, and undoubtedly are higher in some areas depending on what those requirements are. So, we see the local control of land use can affect the desire of residents and the community, people who live in the community. So there can be height restrictions and green building requirements, and some communities require tile roofs to maintain the character of their community, all of which add to cost. And then, of course, just the issue of exclusionary zoning. We know that single family, we see in some communities, is the priority with either outright opposition to any kind of multifamily, but those sorts of things impact growth and growth containment, which I know is a big issue in Ventura County, with its agricultural belt that it has and the desire of people to maintain that aspect of the community. So those first two bullets in terms of land use and design requirements do affect cost. Then you just add in approval delays. The reality is that a lot of city planning departments and permits areas they're understaffed and overworked in a lot of instances, which ends up contributing to delays to approving projects, which also adds costs. And then the unfortunate public opposition to rental and affordable housing that we see in so many communities, and how we go about addressing that. The California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, it's hard to believe it's really been around since 1970. And we forget that when it was originally created, it was designed to give a voice to disadvantaged communities, to protect them against environmental harm in their individual communities. Unfortunately, since it now applies to all discretionary projects, public or private, which require approval, it's sort of become weaponized, for lack of a better word. So another factor that contributes to delays. Then we have tax policies on the state and federal level. So on the state level, we're really seeing that play out in the upcoming election. So Prop 13 really has created the fiscalization, as we call it, of housing policy, where basically Prop 13 created sort of a perverse effect for cities because they don't want to approve housing because it increases service costs, with fire, police, schools, etc. And it's hard to collect those since the property taxes for many areas are sort of frozen based on Prop 13. So they end up having to add fees to address those additional service costs. And it also has the effect on the state level of keeping people in their home, which is another ballot measure that we'll see if people will be able to take their property tax valuation assessment with them when they move to another community. So I guess we'll see how the state feels about that. And then the federal tax policies, I think we all know, we subsidize home ownership in this country extensively. And if you look at it, it's actually regressive. People at the higher income levels benefit more than those at the lower income levels. But again, this is, we don't see the same kinds of tax support for affordable housing that we do on the home ownership side. And then there's just construction costs. So when you look at what makes up the cost of the units and to do construction, the Turner Center estimates that the cost of labor and materials are about 67% of the cost, land another 11%, the remainder is fees for consultants, taxes, title, escrow, etc. We also continue to build in the same way we've been building since the 1940s, stick-built housing. We are seeing some innovation around modular housing, panelized construction, cross-laminated timber, but a lot of innovation around construction at this time, which we believe is a real cost saver. In terms of labor, interestingly, between 2005 and 30%, people are not interested in seeing their kids go into construction, and overall dropped from about 11.8 million to 10.6 million. There's been a lot of interest in, how do we increase the number of people in the construction field, which pays well, from vocational training to, just looking at other alternative ways and that can help make people realize it can be an interesting area of work and lucrative for them also. And then in terms of just materials costs, we have trade words that add tariffs, gone up substantially also, and then you add in the natural disasters, but also demand for construction workers themselves. So, how do we go about increasing production? We are not going to buy our way out of this, so there are a lot of barriers to building and to building equitably. So as I said, it looks, streamlining permitting and approvals would make a big difference. We need to look at restrictive and exclusionary local land use policies. And I think that it's important that we talk about how we do that in an effective way. And Minneapolis is one of the prime examples that people point to where they had a lot of discussion about equity and ended up being one of the, the first city in the country that really addressed single family zoning and pretty much for the most part, allowed now multifamily in what had been primarily single family areas in the past. But they spent a lot of time on the front end talking about their local land use policies and how they got there. And, it resonated with people as they began to talk about the equity issue. We also need to assess, the fees that we charge to fund infrastructure. How many, what's the way we do this, and how we can go about looking at alternative resources to do that. Bringing down the cost of construction, as I just in the prior slide talked about the factors that contribute to that. And, and then in the area of affordable housing, how do we really end up, creating the new incentives and funding streams that will support affordable housing construction? Now, the state has been helpful. In 2019, we had a banner year around state legislation. There was over 200 housing bills introduced in 2019. And, they ranged from dollars for building and acquiring affordable housing, a big focus on homeless populations with specific funds for the development of housing and services. There was an expansion of the low-income housing tax credit program, trying to address the issue of providing access to communities of opportunity and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating incentives for housing located near transit, and then looking at barriers for new types of housing, such as accessory dwelling units. One of the things that we've begun to look at the Turner Center is what was the density of neighborhoods maybe 20, 30 years ago. And I'll use myself as a prime example. I live in a home that was built in 1928, I think it was. It's a 4-bedroom house. There are 2 of us who live here. And we happened to meet the people who were in this house in the early 1930s and 40s. And they were a much larger family. So a lot of the concern about, we're going to end up with too many people in single family neighborhoods if we do accessory dwelling units, we probably won't even approach the density that existed there before. And then there was, within the state legislation, there was also an effort to start inventorying what vacant land is suitable for housing and looking at surplus land policies to create opportunities for additional housing development. And then in 2020, thus far, the year that just ended, it really was a dismal year for affordable housing. And mainly the legislature ran out of time because of COVID and all the pandemic issues. But we did get, I think the number is a little under 20 some new housing bills. We got further zoning changes, more density bonus incentives. If you work with HCD, you'll appreciate the fact that they're trying to streamline the HCD application process, excuse me. But all in all, we haven't yet fully seen the implementation of all of the bills that were adopted in 2019. So, we should be seeing hopefully some increases in production as a result of the legislative changes that occurred in that session. So what I'd like to go to now is a case study. And this is a supportive housing innovation. I like this because it encompasses some of the barriers that I've talked about, which is financing, zoning, and construction. This involved 3 nonprofits, Abode Communities, LA Family Housing, and Mercy Housing, and also the financing with the California Community Foundation. I'll get a little more detail of what they're getting from the city of Los Angeles. But they started, I thought, looking at the importance of a vision. The 3 nonprofits came together and said, to make effective use of the dollars that are available, we really need to look at what are the cost drivers and how do we bring those down. So they standardized site selection, design, construction financing, and looked for time and cost savings. And they agreed on this vision. The 3 of them all came together, agreed, and were clear where they wanted to go. So their goal was a long-term real estate asset with 55-year affordability covenants, which is pretty darn good considering some, it's not a 20, it's not a 30, 55 years. I do see some that on occasion that are 99 years, but this is really at the higher end. So how did they go about doing this? Well, as I mentioned, there was a proposition on the ballot in 2016 in Los Angeles that was designed. It was called the Homeless Reduction and Prevention Housing and Facilities Bond Measure. And it was a bond measure for $1.2 billion to be paid for by an increase in property taxes. And it passed with 77% approval. The homelessness issue was, front and center at that time, still is, but the idea was that this funding they would target to build 10,000 units of supportive housing, and they thought that the dollars that came from Prop Triple H as they call it, that it would help, cover maybe about 30% of the funding costs to develop supportive housing. During the time period since that was adopted, the costs ended up exceeding the original cost estimates of how much money a unit would cost, primarily the factors that I previously spoke about. You know, construction costs went up, labor costs went up, time delays, etc. So they knew that they needed to address factors that would hopefully, so they decided that what they would do was design a scalable and replicable modular housing type. And you know, this was after doing some research on ways to reduce construction costs. And they also, on the financing, wanted to leverage affordable housing expertise. So how could they best utilize tax credits? What would be the most effective utilization of tax credits with other subsidies that could ensure that they help brought costs down? And then finally, they established a $5 million program-related investment, philanthropic investment, that created a revolving loan fund. The funds came from the California Community Foundation, and those dollars would be used to invest in the prefabrication process of the modular housing types, because the factory requires a deposit before they begin building the units. So this was a key piece to help them get there. So this is kind of what it looked like. So they went in and asked for a reservation for Prop Triple H of somewhere between $17.5 to $35 million, depending. When they were in initially, they needing to identify sites, etc. So that ranged from a high of, they wanted to do 360 units. So the subsidy would go from maybe $48.6 thousand for at the lower end, all the way up to around $97,000. But still, within the figures they were working with at the time, that sort of was around that 30% financing that they were looking for, plus the revolving loan fund from the California Community Foundation. So they settled on 6. They would do 6 sites, 360 high-quality units. And their goal was to get those units completed in 24 months from start to occupancy. So underline, is stated, deliver supportive housing faster at a lower cost. So this is, they started with by right zoning. So in Los Angeles, they have a transit-oriented community or housing ordinance, and also an ordinance that addressed supportive housing. So they weren't going to be looking for any basically any special zoning, required any zoning changes. It was going to be by right. They wanted sites that were 20,000 square feet, $40,000 of land cost per unit. As I said earlier, 60 units. They were bold, no residential parking, and the average of the prototype unit would be 300 square feet. And they used dedicated brokers and land use consultants who had this clear criteria for by right sites that were going to be accessible for modular units, because the units have to be there delivered up to the site by truck. And then they use streamlining provisions in the various ordinances to reduce costs and time. So with that in mind, how did this, let me talk about the construction aspect of it. They settled on working with Factory OS. This is a modular construction company that is located in Northern California and is relatively new, maybe been around it's been about 4 years, I think. And the goal is to deliver multifamily housing faster at a lower cost. The CEO, Rick Holliday, had a background in affordable housing. He started his career working, administering a CDBG program for a city. Then he became the CEO of Eden Housing, nonprofit housing developer, and eventually co-director of Bridged Housing when it was first created. And then he moved into private development. I've known Rick for years, and he is truly one of the most innovative, creative people I know. And when he moved out of the nonprofit sector, he went into doing development of loft units or live workspace in San Francisco based on a visit that he made to New York, and said, we can do this in California. This makes sense in San Francisco. And really was he did the first live workspace in San Francisco. So he's always thinking about ways to innovate and be creative. And he looked at other countries when he was working on the factory, went to Sweden. They've been doing modular construction for some time. And, lessons learned as he began to develop the factory. And, I would say on the labor practices, this has been interesting. It's a unionized shop, but it's only one union, the Carpenters Union. They do everything on the site. But it's so great to go there and see the workforce, and a lot of women on the floor working, and people who are learning construction. So it's been a real success in terms of, broadening the skills of people who can potentially do this kind of work. Factory OS is very focused on innovation. You see the reduction in cost and time in building. You can see you're building the same thing over and over. The boxes, as we refer to them, they sit on a line that pulls them along, so people don't have to get up on ladders. You're not wasting materials that you bring to the site that you don't need. You don't have weather delays. All the sorts of things that add to the construction costs when you're building on site. And so on the plus side, you get the predictability. Obviously, you're building the same thing over and over again. A lot more safety, less accidents on building inside. It's scalable and it's efficient. So really, this was their primary partner for the 3 nonprofits that were looking to do the supportive housing. So what were the outcomes? So they did do their 6 supportive developments, 360 supportive units. If they had done the traditional method, the cost per unit would have been about $525,000 and taken 55 months. With modular, they were just a little, not quite $100,000 savings on the cost per unit, but the timeline was more than half, cut in half in terms of the traditional method. So they got an 18% saving in cost and a 53% savings in timeline. So overall, a huge success and a very interesting case study of bringing together varieties of factors to innovate around building housing, particularly supportive housing, which is greatly needed, and ways from financing to zoning to the actual construction to achieve their goal, which was a sustainable, cost-effective supportive housing unit. So now I want to move into talking more about innovation. So how do we turn and find opportunities that will really create impactful change? So those photos are just some examples of, in the Netherlands, they're building eco-communities on the canal. Sweden, the modular housing, you see the ADU unit there. So all in all, just suggests that strategic and innovative approaches to how we address the development of housing can be, impactful and make a real difference. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what is innovation. So I just want to give credit to the Alliance for Innovation. This is an organization that is really focused. It's a nonprofit focused on it's creating a passion for innovative cultures and organizations. The focus is on primarily for this organization is on local units of government, but the principles, I think, apply regardless of the kind of organization that you're in. And they have now over 300 local governments testing and accelerating the development of innovative practices and policies in a variety of different areas. So what is innovation? Probably the word you hear most often is it's disruptive, and implies that it's a huge change. But it actually doesn't have to be world changing. It can be incremental, small changes that make a difference. And it has to be relevant, and it has to be applied to your work, and it has to deliver value. So if it's not, you may have a great idea, but if it doesn't end up being something people. And I think the other thing that's key is it's the intersection that often ideas are found together. I want to tell you about someone I'm working with right now. I'm not going to give their name because they're still to see with someone from this organization. We were talking over during one of our lunches, and he told me an idea that he had about accessory dwelling units, and he happens to be the chief lawyer for this organization. So we talked about how it might work, and I thought it was a great idea how he was seeing how they might be able to create and support the development of accessory dwelling units, and for their employees was the thought. So began the conversations with the organization, and it was pretty funny. Their real estate people were like, you stay in your own lane, you know, you're in the legal department, what do you know about housing? And it really took the CEO to say, you know what, this is actually a cool idea. Why don't we explore it? So just to say, it's important to realize that innovation can come from all different places in the organization and doesn't have to be a subject matter expert. So, you know, the next time somebody has an idea, don't just automatically retreat to your silo. So, you know, at its core, it's designed to make things better. I want to stress again that it can be new to you. It doesn't have to be something that no one's ever done before. And you know, what you're looking is to produce new and better results that make positive differences for your stakeholders. And you know, the adoption is really important because when you have something new and critical, that becomes your criteria of success. Is, are people willing to adopt it and do it? And I think it's important to remember you can't get there by doing the same old safe thing. You know, this does really require to push yourself out of your comfort zone and imagine what might be, to be able to think about creativity. So I want to give you in the next slide an example of what we call incremental innovation. So that's a suitcase that, you know, those are the kind of suitcases I grew up with in my family. They're probably still in my mother's basement. She never throws away anything. So this is, you know, incremental innovation builds on existing knowledge. So we had luggage. That wasn't new, nor were wheels. But then somebody in 1970 who was in an airport and saw a family struggling with big, heavy suitcases with the kids trying to drag them. And, you know, father with 2 or 3 suitcases under each arm trying to take this, you know, weight through the airport. And just thought, this is crazy. And this gentleman's name was Bernard Sadeau. And, you know, he put in a patent for luggage with wheels. And it was granted in 1972. So that was almost 50 years ago. And when this came out, I remembered getting a suitcase like this. The wheels were on the bottom and you pulled it with this leash. And you no longer had to carry your suitcase, which was a great, you know, this was wonderful. You'd go through the airport more quickly. Unfortunately, it wasn't terribly stable. And would, you know, if you hit a bump, it would fall over. And so it could be frustrating, but it was better than lugging your suitcase. But in 1987, Northwest Airline, the rollerboard, more stable, and I think it's pretty interesting, Northwest Airlines. And you know, there's been improvements on this. We now have changed the industry, the travel industry, tremendously by having this innovation in luggage. So is this the future? You know, you shouldn't laugh, because who knows, who would have predicted that we would have scooters throughout our cities for last mile of travel. So that's incremental innovation. Then we have fundamental innovation. So fundamental innovation is you're entirely changing the approach. So you see a telephone, a calculator, a set of encyclopedias, a calendar. What replaced those? Well, most of you have probably guessed a cell phone. Cell phones have really changed everything. All of those things that used to take a separate, you know, a telephone or pull out a calendar, have really changed, partly because of big data. And, you know, big data is about volume, variety, and velocity, as opposed to old-fashioned data, which you could do with the factors on the left. So, you know, this is an example of where something just entirely changed the approach. And, you know, you're all capable of doing that, you know, so where do you then look for innovation opportunities? So business models are one. Modular housing construction is a good example of that. Processes. How do you apply for tax credits and project-based vouchers, for example, in a way that's aligned, that makes the development faster, as opposed to everybody having different timelines and they don't sync up, and instead of being able to do a development in a year, you have to wait 3 years so that you're in the right funding cycle, etc. And programs and services. The one that I like most, where I've seen some interesting innovation, particularly in cities, is community engagement. Instead of relying on the 3 or 4 people who show up at a council meeting or even a small group, some cities are now starting to use a platform. One of the ones that's being used is Nextdoor, to get, the opinions from thousands of people, not just a few. So, those are examples, business models, processes, programs, and services where you can look for innovation opportunities. So how does innovation and kind of develop and flow through an organization? So this is kind of the diffusion, whoops, go back up. This is an example of the, what they call the innovation curve. So reading from left to right, this is a study. Mr. Rogers looked at organizations and said, about 2.5% of the people who work in organizations are innovators. They're the ones who come up with the ideas. You know these people. They're in meetings. Maybe it's you who says, I've got an idea, or why can't we do this way? And then there's the early adopters, those 13.5% who are like, oh, that sounds cool. Let's give it a try. The early majority are slower, a little bit of a wait and see attitude. They don't leap right up, but they're not negative. The late majority are people who want more data. They want a proof of concept. You really have to convince them that this will work. But remember, these 4 comprise 83% of the workforce. But on the far right, that 16% of laggards are the ones who often can stop innovation from happening. These are the people who say it will never, ever work. I remember when tax credits were first introduced and I was having a staff meeting, and my CFO said to me, are you people crazy? No one is ever going to buy tax credits to finance affordable housing. So it shows you what he knows or knew at the time. But, I think it's just important to remember that this is what it looks like. And to be able to implement innovation, whoops, what happened there? There, to be able to implement innovation, you need to make persuade, explain why you want to do this, and make a decision. Either we're going to adopt or reject it, and then confirmation becomes very important in terms of letting people know that we're moving forward with this. So why is change so hard? I'm going to ask you to quickly do something. Would you please take your hands and clasp them like this? Hopefully you can see that. Just put your hands together. Look what thumb is on top. Mine happens to be the left. Now I want you to take your hands apart and put them back together with the other thumb on top. So usually you have to stop and think about that for a minute. And it doesn't feel terribly comfortable. Because, even though you never taught you, nonetheless, it feels awkward. And change is like that. You know your current work. You do it well. It's kind of that uncertainty and fear. What if I fail? What if I can't do this? What will people think of me? Will I make a mistake I can't recover from? I've never done this before. I'm uncertain. And then there's the aversion to risk. And particularly if you're controlled by a regulatory agency, that really makes you less likely to want to take risk. Maybe you don't have a clear goal. You don't know where you're going. And the lack of dollars makes it hard, no question about it. But I want you to think about this warning. There are 2 types of organizations today, quick to change and dead. And the pandemic has really shown that. Some people have been able to shift their business model quickly and are surviving, and others have closed their doors forever. Remember that the systems that we work in reward the status quo. And, so getting out of those boundaries takes some work. And, the barriers to innovation in public agencies in particular, you run into politics, both with a big P and a small p. Lots of problems around miscommunication and complexity, particularly can inhibit collaboration and prohibit new ideas from spreading, as indicated. So how can you, think about those barriers that are keeping you from advancing? And how can you shake up your organization to open the organization to what-if possibilities? I mean, you really have to begin with yourself. What's holding you back? You have to assess your own personality and organization to know the challenges that keep you from moving forward. I grew up in a family that was very risk averse, and I know that in my leadership style, I used to see that. And so, recognizing that can help you kind of break through those things so that you can create create innovation in your organization. And risk taking is a key part of that. If you ever saw the movie of Jaws, when they lean over the boat and say, "Uh-oh, we're going to need a bigger boat," just remember that 99% of success is built on failure. They didn't start out with the perfect size boat. So what's your tolerance for risk? Most organizations have very low tolerance. That's why we have standard operating procedures, and we're reactive to change before when it becomes absolutely essential, then we do it. And it's frankly less risky to wait for someone to tell you what to do. So, taking that initiative and reinterpreting it and figuring out what you need to do is important. And you want to walk the talk and lead by example. I would also just say that, other factors that are important is vision. We saw that with the case study. You absolutely have to know where you're going to go in order to get there. I love that Yogi Berra quote that if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. It's absolutely true without vision. And you end up in a confused and reactive mode if people in the organization don't know where you're trying to achieve. And really, vision can transform the innovation strategy into the way, build in the organization the kind of change that you want to have and be forward looking and really energize that journey. And most importantly, get people to be empowered to make recommendations and to innovate and take risk and be really forward thinking. I just want to, sort of also emphasize the importance of leadership and change. So the earlier paradigm, which the baby boomers are really familiar with, is on the left side there, the control sort of command style of organization versus the current and future, which is much more about being a leader and a coach and empowering, and particularly on the generational differences that we're seeing. Millennials expect much more to work in that kind of current future paradigm. And when you have a multi-generational workforce, that can really present some challenges. But, it's important for engagement for employees to feel like they've got a stake in the organization, they understand the vision, they're asked their opinion, they're listened to and appreciated, and you see the kind of productivity that comes from bringing those factors all together in a way that can lead to innovation solutions. So innovation is critical. So what does disengagement look like? And I love this photo because I think it really shows what a disengaged employee could look like. When I do this in live sessions and I ask people, why do you think this happened? Everybody says, oh, the person that was striping just said, oh, it's not my job. I'm only here to stripe. Other people said, oh, he's lazy. He's lazy. Didn't want to get out of the truck. But I really think the person who raised their hand and said, what if this person was told, you can't get out of the truck no matter what? Your job is simply to drive down the road and stripe. So that's important to think about when you're thinking about engaging employees so that you don't end up with this kind of situation, regardless of whether it's the employee just saying it's not my job or you've told the employee it's not their job. So in closing, I want to share this quote with you. Expect the best, plan for the worst, and prepare to be surprised. I think that just makes people be much more open to trying to innovate, being ready for it. And as leaders, somebody has to lead. So why not you and creating innovation in your organization? So we'll go back now to the screen, and here we are. And Andrea, I don't know if we have any questions.
We do. Wow, what an exciting adventure with your presentation. We have two questions. The first one is from Anita, and it says, how about legislation that requires planning departments to assign one plan checker to a project until finish and prevent plan changes each time you visit for a plan check, depending on who you talk to on any given day, cut in permitting processes?
That's a perfect example, top-down approach. I question whether planners think that will be effective. So I think that it would make sense if, I'm not sure whether this was, intended to propose legislation like this. Clearly, there's an advantage of working with the same person throughout a planning process and getting clarity and not getting changes back and forth. I hope I'm understanding the question. But that's the kind of process for innovation where you really need to sort of sit down in a group and just throw out ideas. What are we going to get from this? What's the value add to the person who's coming in to get the permit? Is this a good use of resources? Is there a technology solution? So I think that's a very complex issue that requires a fair amount of different people thinking about what's the best way to go about this.
All right. The second question is, again from Anita, just how much local control do cities have on land use? I hear lots of state guidelines, etc.
Well, I think that this is a difficult tightrope that I think the state is trying to work with this changes. RENA is really was designed for years to try to get community, that's the regional housing needs assessment, to get people to do their fair share. And we haven't seen much impact over that. People just, were years and years behind building jobs, bringing in jobs, but not building enough housing. And so the state has become a lot more proactive about, basically setting standards for what's necessary. So I think the local control is being more circumscribed, not that you don't have it, but, I think it's an attempt to make clear you've got to do your part and, do it in an equitable way. So I think we are seeing changes. And of course, then we saw tremendous pushback on some of the height limitation bills that were proposed regardless of community. So there's a balance, but I think we're still working through this, and cities could be much more proactive, I believe, in playing a role in coming up with solutions that would address the concern about the mismatch between jobs and housing, ranges of types of housing and affordable housing, and not just waiting for the state to tell, the state to come down and say you have to do it like this.
All right. And you have one last question from Tracy Hudak. Hi Tracy. Are you aware of any innovations in curbing gentrification issues?
I really do think that this is really a conversation about equity in a lot of ways. And so, we are seeing activities around preserving affordable housing, preserving naturally affordable housing. We're seeing people buying up units that are reasonably priced because of the cost of doing development to help, and also tenant protection, all aimed at addressing, the issues of gentrification in communities. And part of it is the willingness to have, I think, that conversation around equity and, how did we get here? And what kind of community do we want to live in? And how do we provide a range of housing for everyone? But, the preservation and tenant protection are a key part of that. And I think that's some of the most interesting activities I've seen around innovation. I also think community land trusts and some of the work being done in that area is also addressing that issue of, how do you balance on the other side of gentrification?
I think that's all the questions that we have for you, Ophelia. Thank you so much for your creative and innovative presentation. And will you be around for other questions if people have some later on and after this session is complete?
Well, I can check the Q&A and chat and see if there's anything else. If not, thank you very much for having me, and I hope that you found the information in the presentation valuable.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your morning.